Well, so welcome and thank you everyone for coming out for this great little show we're going to try to put on today. So it was 40 years ago on May 19, 1979 that the first meeting of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club took place. And it took place in the Issaquah Sportsmen's Clubhouse here just not too far from where we are right now. Tom Mechler, who's one of our speakers today, has been a long-time member of that club and arranged for that meeting in that historic venue. Well, that was 40 years ago. 40 years of hiking and trail building and advocacy for open spaces have taken place. There's been some failures and setbacks, but some amazing accomplishments over that period of 40 years. And we're just going to take a little bit of time today to reflect back on those accomplishments. So we have a great lineup of speakers for today to walk us down memory lane. We have Tom Mechler, who will talk about the early days of the club. Then Barbara Johnson on remembering Harvey. Now, sadly, she can't be here today, so her comments will be read by David Kappler. And then David Kappler will talk about our advocacy efforts over the years. And then Ken Koenigsmark on the spawning of the Mountains to Sound Greenway. Doug Simpson on publications of the club over the years, and then a little QA session and all that. So it should be a good program. First of all, I want to just talk a little bit on the history of the name of the club and the name of these mountains that we love, Issaquah Alps. Many of you know all about this anyway, but there might be some newcomers here that aren't familiar with some of that history, so I thought it was worth touching on a little bit. Some of this prehistory stuff comes from things Ralph Owens here in the meeting here today, and he's written a lot of prehistory things that have been in the Alpiner, which is good stuff. Then Harvey Manning produced a kind of an autobiographical piece that remains unpublished, but it's out there and available, and it's entitled "This Petty Pace or the Homely Trees," and it covers a lot of this prehistory things too. Just as a little aside too, it's kind of an interesting title, "This Petty Pace or the Homely Trees." Harvey basically couldn't write a paragraph or a page without making either a literary or historical allusion of one sort or other. And here is just a simple title of one little publication that has two literary allusions. "This Petty Pace" is a reference to Shakespeare's Macbeth's soliloquy, and the homely trees is the Chaucer allusion, all there in one little title. So the chapter in that document that talks about this creation of Issaquah Alps as the name, the moniker for the area, is modestly entitled "On the Seventh Day," another literary allusion to the Bible and the creation story. So here's a great little snippet out of there. Well, I just scanned it, took it right out of the document because it's kind of fun to just see the process of writing, and he bangs it out on his typewriter and then makes some handwritten scratches on it and all that. And I'll just read this paragraph here. "My point of departure, my big bang, was Whipper's book, Scrambles in the Alps. Driving to the rocks and the snows of Snoqualmie Pass, we climbers followed US 10 through what we call the Issaquah Blobs. My intention was to use them to instigate a revolution. Throw off the wheels that bind. You have a world to regain. Walk, 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 even when you don't suffer from hysterical aphasia. But selling the revolution required a more stirring battle cry. More than blobs, so I reared back and created the Issaquah Alps." So, at first maybe that's was a bit of a joke, but we all love that name, and it stuck, and now we say it with a straight face, even though they're nothing like the real Alps, but it has a nice ring to it, and it stuck. So he had included some, he banged up a bunch of words about the Issaquah Alps and how we can protect it, and sent it out to a number of newspapers in the area, and didn't get a whole lot of attention until finally Susan Schwartz of the Seattle Times came across it and decided to publish a condensation of it entitled "Issaquah Alps, Preserved Greenbelt near Seattle," And that's when the phone began to ring, he relates. And then he modestly acknowledged that he was the creator. Creator was me. So that's how that all happened. And then following from that, of course, the creation of the club and the name of it included that reference to the Issaquah Alps. And we called it a trails club, not the Issaquah Alps Conservancy or something like that. It's a trails club, and I'll talk a little bit about that too. But let's reflect a little on the wilderness within, a theme song from Harvey's writings that we try to embody here too and enjoy. These little mountains around Issaquah are not the same as the Alpine Lakes Wilderness and Glacier Peak Wilderness and these other wildernesses, but it has some attributes of it. Those are the wilderness without the touch of man, where man is only a temporary visitor, versus the wilderness within, which is what we like to call these close-in mountains that still have value and some of the attributes of the wilderness without. So we've captured that in some of our recent artwork here for some stickers and stuff. Wandering the wilderness within our touch, within our neighborhood, within our realm, the realm of man. So what's our strategy for protecting the wilderness within? Well, Boots on the Trail has been a part of that from day one, and that's why it's characterized as the Trails Club, but it's not with that in mind. It's with protecting these areas that we put the boots on the trail, because Harvey would say boots on the trail equals votes for the trail. A clever strategy. Maybe things have changed over the 40 years. It's, the number of hikers that are tromping those trails now is certainly greater than it was 40 years ago. But the strategy still has value and merit. And so, we proclaim, hikers of the world unite, for trails we will fight, we shall succeed, we shall prevail. Viva la trails! All right, thank you. That was good. Let's try one more time. On 3. Viva la trails! Yeah, very good. Thank you. So with that, I'll make mention to 1 week from today, we're having our next event in this series of anniversary-related things. The Viva la Trails Day at Tiger Mountain, which will be at the High Point Trailhead. And we'll have some stuff set up there in the education shelter, which is just off the main trail that heads up the mountain there. And we'll lead a few hikes from there, and we'll have some refreshments of literature and things like that too. I'll just draw attention to all of the conservation, trail building, and hiking successes we've had in that domain, the Tiger Mountain domain, over the years. So please come out and support that if you have the day free. So we're ready. Ooh, I'm missing a slide. All right, well, there should be a slide here that I just wanted to acknowledge the charter members that may be here with us. So if you're a charter member, please stand up. Who all do we have that's charter members? Yeah, Tom, Mechler, Mechler, yes. All right. We have 5 of them, I think, so that's great. We're going to do a little photo shoot at the end of this, so don't run off. We'll go outside and do a little group photo of all the charter members. If we can do that, I would love to have that, so please stand by for that. So we're ready to move into our first speaker, Tom Mechler, charter member of the IATC. And he arranged for that first meeting in the Sportsmen Club 40 years ago. He's been a longtime member of that organization as well, board member and hike leader. So please welcome Tom Mechler.
Good morning, and it looks like a good morning out there. On coming to the meeting this morning, I happened passing by the trailhead on Cougar Mountain, and there was a pack of cars out there.
Hold the microphone a little closer.
What's that?
Hold the microphone a little
Oh,
closer.
okay.
Thank you.
There was a bunch of cars out there at the Cougar Mtn Trailhead, and also the shuttle bus for the Alps was making a trip around there. So it's quite a change from when we first started. First of all, Harvey Manning got the ball rolling. My family knew of Harvey through his many hiking books. We took a lot of hikes from out of his book. Our whole family liked to hike, and there was an opportunity arose to go hiking with Harvey in the Issaquah area. We read about this in the Issaquah Press, and we went on a series of 3 hikes with him prior to the forming of the club. Okay.
Not that I was, did video and audio in grade school, so you could get out of class.
Okay. Yeah, the first hike we took with Harvey was up in Tiger Mountain. I'm not sure it was West Tiger 3. I know we did that. I'm not sure if we went to West Tiger 2. And there was quite a number of people on that particular hike. Our second hike was Middle Tiger. And at that time, we parked up on Tiger Mountain Road and hiked up from there. And there was a number of people on that hike also. And when we got to the top, we sat down, we broke out our lunch. It seems that most of the group just turned around and went right back down. So Harvey, my wife, and I, and Florence Boyce, we stayed up there and had a leisurely lunch and a long talk with Harvey. Our third hike was on Cougar Mountain, May 5th, 79. That was the thunderstorm hike. Some of the members there were Harvey, Tim O'Brien, Dave Kappler, Buzz Moore, Florence Boyce, my wife and I, and there was some other gal, I can't remember her name. She used to hike with her son. We ate our lunch and talked about starting a hiking club. I offered the use of the Sportsmen's Club as a meeting place. Later, we scheduled a meeting at the Issaquah Sportsmen's Club, May 19th, at the Clubhouse there. At the meeting, we decided to name the club the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. I suggested a name for the publication as the Issaquah Alpiner. My wife thought that was pretty corny, but most of the group liked it, and it kind of stuck. And it was kept that name for several years, and it was later changed to the Alpiner. The old newsletters the first ones were typed out on 8.5 by 11 and printed up. And later we had more information to put in the newsletters, and it would be too many pages using that, so what we did, I reduced the print size down to 63%, and we made a smaller booklet holder so we get a lot more pages on there for the money. And that was all cut and paste. And then the job came of getting the newsletters distributed. So we set up tables in my living room at home, and we had a number of the members came in, and we assembled the newsletter, and the first copies we hand addressed them. Later we had printed labels, but then we had to address them and put the labels on. The first ones we had to add the stamps. Later we got a permit for bulk mailing, which cuts the cost quite a bit. And that was always a challenge. With our postmaster here in Issaquah, my wife would take them in, and he had a set of guidelines that had the way to set it up. Got it all squared away. Next time he came in, his rules changed. So the third time, she wrote down all his instructions and had him sign the instructions. So that worked out pretty good from there on. We never had any more problems. The club was formally incorporated January 15th, 1980. And December 27th, signing the Article of Incorporation. We had stated the purpose of the club, club goals, memberships, and later we had a good write-up in Sunset magazine. It boosted our membership by quite a bit. Some of the family hikes early, they were the trails were blazed by local hikers who later joined the club and led hikes for us. New trails are still being developed and maintained by the club. Some early hikes, one of them that's most memorable is Tim O'Brien leading a hike up to the Talus Cave. We left in the evening, an evening hike, and most everybody had flashlights. At that time, if you've been up to the Talus Cave area there, right now they've got it fenced off, and the main cave that we went into, you can kind of still see down in where the entrance to the cave was. And we spent too much time up there, and it started getting dark, and Tim thought, well, we'll just kind of do a dead reckoning hike back to the site. Well, that proved to be a disaster. Yet we were tramping through the brush, and some of the people had flashlights, some didn't, some batteries gave out on it, and we didn't get home till just about midnight. And in our case, we had my mother and my stepfather were visiting, and they were worried because they knew we were going to the hikes, and they thought maybe something bad happened. But so, as a result of that, the next hike that Tim signed up for, let me read the thing from the booklet. It says, "Rejoice, all ye who heard about the terror tales about this trip. Now that the Cave Loop Trail has been flagged and largely boot beaten into a good tread, the trail, it's kind of small trip. There's no danger and little labor now." So, going out that night, there was absolutely no trail. We just kind of brushwhacked all the way through the blackberries and everything else. It was quite a trip. Another thing, in the early days, we didn't have any kind of rules on how many people on a hike. At that time, Harvey said, if even one person shows up, do the hike. Nobody shows up, you don't have to hike. Now we have a minimum of 3 people, which is a good idea. I only led one hike where I had one person. It's another early hike. We led a hike up Middle Tiger, and when we got up there, we could still drive in on the road going to Poo-Poo Point, so we didn't have to hike out from Highway 18. At any rate, when we got up there, we found out we had 3-4 inches of snow on the trail. And it had one lady that had, I think, some silk stockings. She had a coat with mink lining on it. And she had some, they weren't high heel spikes, but her shoes were about like that. We started up, and that's when I didn't notice it before the hike, but we just started in a ways and saw how she was dressed there. So we had the hike proceed, and I took her back to the car, which wasn't too far at that time because we could drive it in the other road. Then I had to rush to catch up to the group again. Another hike, I led up the Talus Caves. we found that there were, besides the big cave that you could see the opening to, there were actually a series of smaller caves inside. You had to go through a little opening about so big, and you drop down, and when you got into the first section of the cave, there was a big boulder there, and then you had to slide off about 6 feet, turn to the right, and there was a small cavern there, and then you go back to that room where we started, and it kind of sloped up a wall, and you climbed up there and then slid down the other side into a larger cave, and then we found there was another exit point where you had to kind of scramble up through. It's turned out I led that the second time. I can't tell people, now just come in one at a time, because it was about a 6-foot drop when you came in there. So what happened, the first person came in, the next person didn't wait, came in, slipped off the rock and landed on the first person. So it was kind of tricky and kind of dangerous. So I didn't want to lead that hike anymore. So, okay. Oh, another hike I had up on Squak Mountain. We came up Chabinsky Trail and then walking across the top to go over to the summit there. And there was a section that was kind of a flat, semi-muddy area. There was all kinds of fresh bear prints in there at the time. So we passed that, walked a little further, and all of a sudden the lady in back of the group let out a scream, and so I stopped, couldn't figure out what happened. What happened was her pack got snagged on a piece of brush, and it made a lot of noise. She thought a bear had attacked her. So you can't come up with all these interesting things. Oh, another hike that was memorial in the early days. Harvey led a hike on New Year's Day up to Poo Poo Point. And on the way back, we just happened to go through the nudist camp down there, this Federation Snoqualmie nudist camp. And we were invited in, but they said if you're coming in, you got to leave your clothes by the door there. So nobody took them up. But I think Harvey had that planned all along, but he didn't tell anybody what was coming up there. Some other things we did, we had Salmon Day booth, and we had newsletters come out. We had the Return to Newcastle program, and then there was the Mountain to Sound Greenway projects and Tiger Mountain State Forest. Okay. Let's see. What else we had here? Well, I just brought a copy of the early newsletters. Just looked like this. The later ones, I took all the large print there, took it to work and got it reduced, and they came out in a little booklet form like so we could get quite a bit in one newsletter. Let's see if there's anything else I want to cover. Well, those are some of the early day experiences, and we had a great time hiking with Harvey and learned a lot from him. And one of his main things that we got was one of the hiking essentials was an umbrella. And that came in handy on a number of hikes because we went wherever the weather was. Any questions on anything on early days?
Thank you, Tom. Yeah, and we'll have a QA session at the end as well. We can talk about that. Since we're touching on the early days now, one of our charter members, Betty Colbert, is here. She's not on the agenda, but I've asked her to come up and speak for a few minutes. So, Betty, you want to come up now? Is this coming through? So try to speak close to the mic.
Okay. Take off my reading glasses. I really hadn't planned to make a speech. I just wanted to just say hello to all these people who obviously either hiked with Harvey, were part of his activist group, or who loved his vision and are here because the vision is still with us, and we still have a club that started out so small that we never expected that we'd make such an impact on the hiking community. The Greenway, you know, we started the Greenway. We started a lot of things, and it's not finished. We're always going to have a fight. And I just wanted to thank you all for being part of this with Harvey. It's interesting that I'm probably the most unlikely person to be part of this very group. It started out very briefly with one hike from Goody's Corner up to Anti-Aircraft Peak. Let me just read just something that Doug put in the paper some time ago. I think it was when we celebrated Harvey's statue, which we're so proud of. The reason it's so unlikely that I would be here is one reason why I'm here, to show his persuasive powers, because I don't think any of us could turn away from his vision and his ability to inspire us all. And I'll just read this. Harvey made a big impact on my life here in the Northwest, starting fresh in a new area and culture. Even though I'm an American, I've been out of the country 10 years. I came here from Switzerland, the real Alps. I don't think he kept that against me at all, but anyway. And he may have just thought I knew more about European forestry than I did, but anyway. That's an interesting side here, but I had not planned on being here. My husband retired from the Foreign Service and came to work at Boeing, and I thought, oh, I'm in Little Italy, little Switzerland here. I'm so lucky, you know. So I actually went and joined the Alps. Just one hike I did with Barbara Johnson. You'll hear from her later. It was at Mtn Park. Now, that wasn't really the Alps. The next hike was with Ann Lieber, and she ended up having a hike on Cougar, so-called. I was at Whispering Heights, just a little above Harvey's cute little cottage on the edge of Cougar. Everybody thought he was on Cougar, but he really wasn't. We were just up from Eastgate. And so what did we do? We did the hilltop. Anybody know what a hilltop is? It's really not Cougar either, but that's what they called it when they first put out these schedules. Anyway, so here I go. I could not have picked a better active club to be active in. Harvey made me that activist, a hike leader from the second time I hiked with him. Second time, I went up the Goody's Corner Trail on the power line, 2 more things, and the next thing I knew, here I was in the midst of Alps that I didn't know. I didn't even know western water. I didn't know anything about the West. I'm Connecticut, you know, and there's not many hills in Connecticut. Anyway, so after, not long after, maybe only 6 months, he made me hike chairman. Can you believe it? He made me hike chairman. I mean, there were a lot of you here who could have done the job better, because Ralph lives on Cougar practically. I mean, he could have been hike chairman, but he picked me, an unknown person out of the real Alps. And so there I was, 3 years, hike chairman, finding the hikes. And one thing that was, you know, something I had to do, I had to follow in his footsteps. That was quite a job. And emulate his prose while trying to get hikers interested in the Alps enough to become foot soldiers also. You know what his prose is like. And, you know, to get people on the trails, you had to make them sound interesting. We did get we got hikers. We got them from the mountaineers. We got them from everywhere. I had committees. We had lots of hikes in those cute little books that Tom just showed you. We did those for years, and then we found that was a lot of work. So Dwight came up from New Mexico, and he did a calendar, which was easier. I brought a lot of that today to show you. I spent a whole week going through my memorabilia. It's amazing what I found, and lots of wonderful letters back and forth with Harvey, because I hiked with him almost every week my first years. I couldn't believe that I had that opportunity every week with our dogs running through the Cougar Mountain, and learned a lot. And he often autographed the books he gave me. To Betty, companion of many trails in years bygone. Our dogs enjoyed each other too. So I always treasure all those things that I learned from Harvey, and everything that we wrote back and forth to each other after he didn't hike anymore and I was out in Maple Valley. And it's just wonderful to think that all of you are still here, still active, still getting remarks from him by reading what he's done. I've got a number of his books. Pippa's Passing, I brought that if anybody wants to read it. I also have the other one mentioned, I'm sorry, and I gave it to a number of people who paid the fee to have it printed. So if you want that one sometime, I've got a lot of things that I could share with you, and I can't keep talking or nobody else will get a chance. But I could go on and on and on, but I don't think I picked a better group to be with and a better companion in the woods, except my kids. I can't ignore I have kids in the woods now too. And I just appreciate the fact that this club has existed all these years and that you're still working at things. We've still got to fight on Cougar Mountain again. I'd read you more about Ann Stewart and her family on the Leo Wall, but Harvey had a lot to say about that. And I appreciate it. Thank you for letting me speak. I just...
Thank you, Betty. That was an extra special little unscheduled bonus. I'm so glad you were able to speak. And so some of the memorabilia items she mentioned, we'll spread them out on the table here afterwards if you want to take a look. Okay, so next up we have David Kappler to read the Barbara Johnson's Remembrances of Harvey.
Thank you. We have some guests here, special guests. Most of our advocacy efforts are to persuade park board members and elected politicians, mayors, and city council members. And we always like to see candidates for city council that appreciate our work. If you're a park board member or a city council member or a candidate for city council or a mayor, would you please stand up? Yep. Or park board chair, thank you very much. Barbara Johnson was very involved with the club at the very beginnings, and she can't be here today. She lives up by Mount Vernon, but I had something else scheduled. I'd like to read hers, and it's very similar to my first experience with Harvey as well. I first met Harvey when our family moved to the Issaquah area. As I looked up and saw the large forested areas on the hills, I assumed there must be trails up there, but how to find out? About that time, there was an article in the local paper by Harvey proposing his plan to preserve the area. Now I knew Harvey by reputation. After all, he wrote the Bible for Hikers, 100 Hikes in Western Washington. I called the paper and asked for a copy of the plan. We don't have the plan. You need to contact Harvey Manning. What? Speak to the guru? Oh no, I don't want to pester a celebrity. The paper gave me his phone number, no email in the 70s, and I girded my loins and made the call. 45 minutes later, we finished our little chat. I think that was the shortest conversation we ever had. When Harvey put out the call for a meeting to organize a club, I had a conflict, so could not attend. Foolishly, I said I would be willing to serve on the board. Silly me. Since no one else volunteered, I was named as vice president. Never again did I volunteer in absentia. After going on a few hikes led by Harvey, Dave Kappler, Tim O'Brien, and others, Harvey suggested, in quotes, that I lead a hike. Now, suggestions from Harvey were impossible to refuse. He thought a hike from Preston to Issaquah would be good, a good one. Just read the description in my book, he said. Okay, I looked it up. It looked easy. We made it a family hike with our 2 young kids. Well, the book description was out of date. The trail ended at the I-90 fence about halfway along the route. After a bit of reconnoitering, we just followed the road to High Point, where the railroad grade began. We made it to Issaquah Creek. Oops, no way to cross without wading. We found a spot to ford the creek and returned to our car. We had taken the Metro bus, actually, to Preston. When we returned home, I called the guru and bit testily explained the conundrum. He did go out the next week and discovered the guidebook's error. We managed to reroute the hike. Later on, a bridge was built to walk across the creek. Many of us were early folk, had to find routes and build trails. A lot of physical work, but very important to get boots on the trail. As vice president and part-time worker, I had a lot of time to drive Harvey to meetings to lobby county officials. I drove as Harvey claimed he didn't like to drive in the big city, although he had lived there and attended the UW. Really, the guy who wrote all those guidebooks couldn't navigate the streets of Seattle. Oh, the irony. After the Newcastle plan was presented to the King County Council, there were inevitable hearings. 3 members of the council whose district overlapped the Newcastle area were the hearings subcommittee. Harvey and I, as well as several other people with interest in the plan, were present for most of the hearings. There was a lot of just sitting and listening. At some point, Harvey asked me to edit one of the letters to an official. I gasped. Edit his writing? He explained that every writer needed an editor. I nervously agreed to do so. Of course, Harvey's letters were typewritten, no Microsoft Office then, on reused paper. His writings were famous for typing errors, arrows, rearranging phrases, all sorts of cross-outs and additions to a scribbling hand, and so on. I learned that every writing needed a second pair of eyes. It was very helpful in my future job when writing brochures, lesson plans, and texts for interpretive signs when I was a park ranger, and for lesson plans as a science teacher for Pacific Science Center. And of course, for IATC publicity and for a short time as Alpiner editor. Most of us founders wore several hats. I led hikes, did publicity, helped organize the return to Newcastle, Salmon Days activities, helped assemble the Alpiner together, edited Harvey's letters to officials, etc. I was not alone. All of us did all of it together. The Alpiner was a cut and paste by hand affair. Each article was typed using different fonts, types, and sizes. No computer software to make it look professional. We all would sit around in someone's kitchen table and address and stamp the newsletter. For major events, much of us took many parts. Dave Kappler stored the salmon booths at his home. Ralph and Peggy Owen put together the photos for the return to Newcastle. Dave also edited Harvey's diatribes. Dave was a political person, and he often had to rein in Harvey's actions. Not an easy task. Yes, I can say. I had to leave the board for a while as I had a job with the city of Bellevue as a full-time ranger and was not allowed to serve on the board of a lobbying organization. Once I was no longer working for the city, I returned to the board as president. I am the only woman to serve as IATC president, a fact that puzzles me. Why has no other woman stepped forward to serve as president? My hope is that that day will come soon. In 2005, my husband and I retired and moved to Cedar Woolley as we loved the Skagit Valley. Both of us flunked retirement and found part-time jobs. In a way of completing the circle, I became a park ranger at the North Cascades National Park. When the superintendent found out I was well acquainted with Harvey, my credibility soared. He asked if I knew Harvey was very important in the park formation. My first thought was, are you kidding? But tactfully, I did not say that. I have since retired from rangering. I still manage a hike or two in the North Cascades and the magic Skagit. I thank Harvey for recruiting me and teaching me so much about being a political lobbyist and a naturalist. And his role in the national park formation was was a big deal, very important. And the national park, the North Cascades, actually came about faster than they expected. So now,
Now you change hats.
okay. So, okay. My disclaimer. This is my slideshow here has not been reviewed by anyone. And so this is not board policy. I also make recommendations about future actions we need to take on cougar, tiger, and the rest. So bear that in mind. Okay, go ahead. Acquisitions. Big part of our work, of course, is acquisitions. And this map here, this is when we were part way on Cougar Mountain, and that's with the black here. And the black on Squak is there. And when you turn around and look at the green, all that green on that map, that's the difference between this map and that map is our 40 years of advocacy. So, lots of strategies to get ground. Actual purchase, Bergsma, we just did that way. 4-to-1, which was where developers concentrated their development on certain parcel, like in Issaquah Highlands, they would then have to donate lots of land for park and open space. Trades, that's how the Tiger Mountain situation came about, was Weyerhaeuser was traded off for other timberlands of DNR. So DNR consolidated their property there. Transfer of development rights and purchase of development rights. It's pretty amazing. The area of the tree farm north of North Bend is as large as the city of Seattle. And the King County bought the development rights for that property. So that's going to stay as forest. It's a huge area. It's being logged like crazy right now, but someday it will be neat. I get all the permits for all of King County forest practice permits. About 2/3 of them are from that property. Okay, next slide, please. How we fund these things: bonds, levies, general budgets. Cities like Issaquah go out and say parks are important to us. Open space is important enough for us to use our general money to do that. Okay. Whoops. Trust for public land for Terra have been very valuable to help bridge funding on that. They don't end up owning land. They don't necessarily donate money, but they help buy things and then get paid back. Then when city and the county and state needs a bridge, they're there. They're also great negotiators with the owners of properties. Okay. Whoops. One more forward. What do we do? Events. We got an event right here today, right? Special hikes, hiking, lobbying. We're twisting arms today. Mayor and council members and park board member. Yes. The Alpiner website, you know all of those kinds of things. We've passed out lots of maps over time, especially Tradition Plateau and the west side of Tiger, but we also were selling maps and sold thousands of them. We have all kinds of shirts over time. We're showing that today, some of us. Newspaper articles. Harvey had a bad relationship with some reporters, but there was a lazy guy for the Seattle Times, and I could write up everything, give the person the names of who the other side he should contact, and my stories would come through just about how I wrote them. It was kind of crazy.
Your slides have
yes.
auto advance programmed into them.
Okay, so that's, okay. What's going on here?
Yeah. Are you ready?
Yes, go ahead. What's happened? We've seen this slide before. This takes place right out here, a block from here. Now there's big trees where this was before the club was actually formed. Okay, next slide.
Your AV assistant's going to step
Yeah. Yes, okay. Here we go. What is happening?
Just hang in there. So just stop slideshow and...
I'm glad we got.
I don't know. What do you do, Mr. Chaplain?
I didn't see, I passed these on to Tom, and he put them in.
Infected with the Kappler virus.
Can you get to the next slide?
Yes, you can just, but I can't
The
guarantee.
next
it's not-
slide?
that's not
Okay,
shown.
there's
No,
a
no,
booth.
Never mind.
Yep.
It's not on the screen. Can you guys see it?
This is, as a retired teacher, the nightmare was the principal comes and it all goes to heck with the technology. At least this. Okay, now forward. Next one. Okay, the booth. Yes, keep going. We've seen the booth. Patches, stickers, bumper stickers, flyers, naming everything, big strategy. We had the phone in a closet. The answering machine was in Seattle. When we started, if you called here, you could not call Redmond without it being long distance. You could not call Preston without it being long distance. We put the answering machine in Seattle, and it was dealt with remotely. People could call there, find out what the hikes were for the week, and leave messages that would be passed on to us. Neckties, famous person with a Issaquah Alps high-priced necktie. Next slide, please. Hope you recognize our former governor, King County Executive, Larry Garrett. And there we had patches. Go ahead, forward. Does not want to go. Patches, stickers, window stickers. Next slide. We had bumper stickers when people had steel bumpers and they were brave enough to be identified with the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, that radical group. We've had all kinds of non-government supporters. REI Foundation, Harvey could call them up and get a couple $1,000s. Same with the Bullet Foundation is now international. When they were a local, he could call up the Bullet Foundation and get a couple $1,000s when we had to reprint a book or whatever disaster. Mountaineers Foundation. Some of these bridges he burned and didn't have that access. The rest of these groups, we got 4 SAVE groups up there that we've been associated with and partner with. Next slide, please. Cougar Mountain, we started with some ground up there. That was the Nike sites. There was the, then forward thrust, Jim Ellis's work, got work in got ground in the May Creek and in Coal Creek. And then we had the Newcastle Community Plan by King County. And we came up, Palmer Coking Coal was a major owner there. The Newcastle Historical Society was great. Newcastle Trails helped support things, and then the map. On our kitchen table, when we lived in May Valley, Harvey and I made this map, or this is actually a version of it. What's happened here? And we proposed the red check mark kind of thing as the Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park, with regional and wildland being an important part of the name. What keeps going on here with our...
Well, it keeps advancing automatically, so I go backwards.
Ah, okay.
Big guns.
Is there a... Okay. Councilmember Winterstein is a technology genius here. He can maybe help us. The point is, here is, when we get the map back, the green is what we started with. The 2 Nike sites and some property in the May Creek Gorge and the Coal Creek Gorge. And that was it for Cougar Mountain. Very small, maybe 50 acres on the actual mountain was the park. Now it's well over 3,000.
Way to go.
Here we go, folks.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Yes, okay. We got to go forward several. Okay, there's the map. Let's go back to the map for a second. Now, this was a ridiculous, crazy, outrageous proposal. We ended up, this is half of what the park is now. I mean, we doubled our outrageous proposal. Okay, next slide, please. History was a big thing. And this was some of Milt Swanson's display at the first return to Newcastle. Next slide. Okay. If there was a trickle, it had a name. That creek was named. Okay. If it was wet a few months a year, it was a swamp or, you know, and the rest. If it had a little elevation gain, it was a hill, a peak, or a summit. Okay. And then every trail, and most of those names are still out there. If you go up on Cougar Mountain, all those screwball names are still there. Okay, that's right. Gotta do that. Okay, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. There's been more acquisitions. Wilderness Creek, the DNR land, which was destined for a clear cut up there. The Bergsma, most recently. Thank you, City of Issaquah. Yes, the mayor's giving a fist up there. The DeLeo family farm. Okay, next slide. Oh, that just jumped. Okay, whatever. The East Village on Cougar Mountain, big ownership. The whole thing there was proposed. All the green, the pink, and the rest was proposed for development. Through a long process, we ended up getting Talus to develop the pink, donated both property on Cougar and Squak. That's Squak right there on that side. Okay, next. What do we have to do? Finish DeLeo family farm property, DeLeo wall. There's some parcels above Talus that we need to acquire, and there's some other things we're working on. Next slide. Okay, Squak, the original gift. Stim Bullet is a personal gift, gave 560 acres on Squak. That was before Issaquah Alps started. Then State Park bought South Squak, huge area all the way down to May Valley Road. The Talus donation on Squak, Debbie's View, a smaller parcel but critical with the view. The upper part of the Sunset Quarry, Margaret's Way, Interpace Mine Site. Those are all important acquisitions, most by King County. Next slide. This is Squak. The green box is the original bullet gift. All the rest of that green and yellow is stuff that been acquired since the start of the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. We got our fingerprints and all over that stuff. Next slide. What to do yet? Lower quarry, or Pacific topsoils. We really need to get that acquired for a trailhead. Wildlife connection to Cougar. Jack Horning was adamant that we got to do a better, safer connection of these mountains for wildlife. The city park director is really adamant about getting a bridge over Issaquah Creek to connect northeast part of Squak across over to the park by Hobart Issaquah Road. And there's a trail called the Lake Sammamish to Cedar River Trail that is unknown, but was proposed at the same time the East Lake Sammamish Trail was proposed. And we are getting some segments. We still have a few segments to do to connect Tibbetts Valley Park with the actual public property on Squak. Okay, next slide. Tiger Mountain, the original public land was 400 acres, Tradition Plateau, because the city of Issaquah got their water out of the leaking springs on the north side of that plateau. And there was half and half. There was a checkerboard pattern of ownership on Tiger between Weyerhaeuser and DNR. And by trades, they got it all consolidated, mostly for consolidated as DNR. We had Bill Longwell working with before the Issaquah Alps Trails Club was formed. Bill Longwell, working with the Mountaineers, was working on the TMT, and he is the super gentleman. I mean, you got Harvey on one side, Bill on the other, and he had negotiated and worked with Weyerhaeuser and DNR to get the Tiger Mountain Trail started. When DNR had a lot of ownerships, they got the advisory committee going. They also came up with a natural resource conservation area, which the city liked that so much that they designated their 400 acres up there as a natural resource conservation area. Section 12 was at the top of the mountain. It was owned by development interests. The DNR acquired that property. The city, through a transfer of development right, acquired the Park Point property, 100 acres on the side of the mountain, outside of Tradition Plateau, behind Issaquah High School. Exit 20 is exit 20 on I-90. We're working on consolidating some property there. Next slide, please. There's Bill Longwell out with Brian Boyle and Bob Rose hiking on Tiger, which this led to designating part of this DNR property as a natural resource conservation area. So they had to buy out the timber rights basically because the DNR properties are supposed to be generating money for the prisons, the K-12, the universities. So they buy out that interest and got it saved as a NRCA. Next picture. Okay, what's to do on Tiger? Biggest complaint I get is I go up to West Tiger 3 and there's no view anymore. Some of us remember when you were up there and it was quite the view. We would go up on the 4th of July and you could watch everybody trying to burn down the whole Puget Sound Basin. We need a better, more direct access to Poo-Poo Point from like Issaquah High School because we cannot solve the problem at the landing zone for Poo-Poo Point. Highway 18, when Highway 18 is going to be improved, the whole safety thing, trails, crossings over to, we need to have safer ways to get from Tiger over to the Raging River and also to Taylor Mountain. Exit 20, we're working on that. There's one parcel left for a DNR to acquire there, and they'll be having a Mountain to Sound gateway there. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of kids every year going up there. And for many of them, it's their first experience with a smelly outhouse, right? And in school, washing hands and all those kinds of things, nothing up there to wash hands with, and it's just not good. Paul.
David, what do you mean by better Poo-Poo Point access to high school?
More direct, because now you have to go up and then drop down.
The trails, it's rooted.
Yeah.
The one that there's not very good.
Right.
Just talking about retreading that, you want a different route.
We want to do a quicker route and better, yeah. Make it more efficient. Okay, next slide. Grand Ridge, Mitchell Hill, that was Issaquah Highlands on that 4-to-1, so 4 times as much open space as developed area. They also did some transfer of development rights on some critical property over on the salmon habitat on the Snoqualmie River, and that land was saved and the development rights were moved to Issaquah Highlands. We've got a county park and a county forest. County park and a county forest. Yes, go ahead. Next slide. Okay, this is Octopus Park here. The Grand Ridge Park goes from the top to the bottom all the way down to I-90, and it's all the junk land the developer couldn't develop, right? So, but it's the great land. It's where the wetlands are, the creeks are, the cool slopes, the big old trees that they couldn't get to in the earlier logging days. So it's a great park, but it's kind of a management nightmare when you look at the shape of it. Next slide, please. Okay, it gets worse. You've got the King County Park property. The Crosshatch property is a county forest land. And then the property with more of an orange outline, those properties are state DNR. And trying to manage something that has these kinds of boundaries with a bunch of private ownerships and homes kind of mixed in between all of these is very difficult. So there's a lot of coordination, a lot of additional planning needs to occur there. Next slide, please. Okay, what do we need to do? On Tiger Mountain, DNR has been good about saying, high-speed bicycles on steep slopes going down, that's not where you want to be putting hikers. And King County has this idea that horses, bikes, and hikers can all be on the same trails and everything will be great. And that's got to change. There's some missing critical parcels, I'm sure, and I don't know which they are. But you look at that map, it's pretty messed up over there in terms of boundaries. There's inappropriate behavior. People think that's a good place to dump their garbage, for one thing. And there's other things going on in that mix of private and many jurisdiction public. We need to do better on having a community-supported plan for the forest lands there and for the park. There's a lack of coordination sometimes. Raging River Quarry is a parcel on the Preston Fall City Road that we would really like to get acquired. It'd be a great trailhead that connects east, north, west. And the site has got some great forest land still that hasn't been turned into quarry on the Raging River. Next picture. 1990 March in the Raging, the Rattlesnake, and Taylor. The march didn't, went across Rattlesnake Mountain on that deal and really got people excited about that and the views there and how cool that was. And the county and DNR made huge acquisitions in there and have that in a protected status. The Raging River Forest is a conglomeration of a bunch of public or private forest lands that of questionable management sometimes, that's being consolidated and run much more efficiently by the DNR. When you've got smaller forest things and you're bound by property owners, you put roads where you don't want them. You can't run a good forest when you're restricted. When you have a big area and you can put the roads where they should be, you can log where you should, and boundaries are more sensical. Also, we have the Taylor Mountain County Forest. The county has decided that this idea of a forest, and that's where we have on Taylor Mountain, coming out of Hobart for the most part. Next slide. There's the dark green is the heavier protection, and the light green is different ownerships of DNR. Okay, next picture, please. Okay. My to-do list. Remember, this is not approved by the board. Expand Raging River Forest. I think that's, and that involves some more acquisitions of private lands. There's at least 2 permits right now for Sirius working on getting theirs, and hopefully they're going to finish up and decide they're done and they want to sell it to DNR. With Highway 18, we'll be looking at new access points and can really take much more advantage of some of the lands in the Raging River Basin, it's a huge basin, and also on Taylor Mountain. George Jackman, raise your hand. His son is the discoverer of Sean Falls, is that right? Grandson. And Sean Falls is a really cool waterfall in the Raging River Basin that we used to lead hikes in the very early days, then they clear cut in there and it was just a mess. We haven't led hikes in there. Some of us have explored a little bit. The potential of starting at Highway 18, a safe Highway 18, going up to Sean Falls, and making a loop up to Big View, which has this amazing view of a slice of Mount St. Helens, big view of Mount Rainier, Glacier Peak, Mount Baker, the Issaquah Alps, Olympics, amazing view from Big View. And then another big loop hike down to 18. That's one of my visions. Next slide, please. Okay, Mount Si, Middle Fork, Dirty Harry's balcony and that. The big thing, those Harvey's books, I won't say the real books because our books were real, but the books that were in every bookstore in Western Washington talked about those areas. Mark Boyer did a huge job for decades working on the Middle Fork. The Middle Fork was an area law enforcement didn't want to go into. It's where you dumped garbage, shot up your old refrigerator, and you read the Northwest murder mysteries, that's where the bodies get found, right? Okay, so that's changed completely. Partly, Mountain to Sound Greenway is putting a huge financial effort into there and doing a lot of work parties and really, the whole thing has changed completely. It's getting to be a super wonderful place, family-friendly place. Next, please. Oh, something happened in the summer of 1990, and we have a gentleman in the back that's going to address that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, and good morning, everybody. Hi. We've heard about the first decade or so of this club. Dave continued on with the story of advocacy up to present. But what happened after that first 10 years? Well, first, I'll tell you who I am, Ken Koenigsmark, and believe it or not, given my youthful appearance, I am the longest serving board member or officer in the Issaquah Alps Trails Club history, with 30 plus years. I know, hard to believe, right? When I only look 30 to begin with. Must have started in diapers. But I'm going to talk about what happened after the initial first 10 years of success in this club, the creation of the Mountains to Sound Greenway. Which one's up there now? Okay, next slide, please. So, after the first 10 years, there was a push. This little club that tried to do things, found out they could, and then their eyes got bigger, their appetite got bigger, and there was a vision. Not just the Issaquah Alps. What about the entire I-90 corridor? We've seen what happens everywhere else. Los Angeles, every place where there's an interstate along a corridor, there is sprawl and urban development. Look at I-5, north and south, if you want a great example locally. Well, this little club said, we don't want to see that happen here. We know better. We've seen the bad examples elsewhere. Let's push and do something different here. Well, that's pretty big. Who's going to take on that? Where's the money going to come from? This is a little club of volunteers with no paid staff. But why was this important? It was Harvey had the vision called the Mountains to Sound Greenway. Jack Horning is the person that took that vision and turned it into reality on the ground in terms of leading and organizing an effort. And why? We could see that Seattle, everybody loved it. It was this well-kept secret at the time. It always rains here. Don't move up here from California. But the floodgates opened. Started in the 80s. We see what's happened now. But these people back then knew that if we didn't act at that time, it was going to be too late. You had to do it then, or it was going to be too late. And the opportunity still existed. At that time, from Snoqualmie Pass to Seattle's waterfront, literally was all Weyerhaeuser forest land. Pretty much. Weyerhaeuser and Forest Service until you got to Tiger Mountain, which was by then DNR, and then that connected somewhat to Squak, somewhat to Cougar, with gaps that were filled in. And then you could go down Cold Creek Park all the way to I-405. Wow. What if we could make that permanent? So this group organized that and began the effort to make that happen. Next slide, please. To do that, they decided to lead a march to bring public attention to this. This is, not that long after the 70s protest marches and things. So what do you do to get attention? You lead a march. That's what this club decided to do. That's not an easy thing to do, especially when you're going cross country. There weren't established trails at that time on Rattlesnake, up and over Squak, through Cold Creek Park, and so on. So there's a lot of planning. It also costs a lot of money. You had to find the routes and build the trails. Ralph Owen was instrumental in doing that, and Peggy. Okay? And they're right here in front. There was a lot of logistics. How do you feed and move the gear and everything of all those people each day? And then, if you're going to make an impact, get the VIPs involved. Make them see what's here. Make them understand. You got to act at a political level to make this vision happen. And then you had to get the landowner's permission, whether it be the Forest Service, they still got to have permits, and whether it was Weyerhaeuser or whoever, you can't just go tromping across their land. So that whole effort, of which Dave was also a big part, damn near broke this club. It was in debt. It didn't know if it could survive, but it went forward. Next slide, please. And it led the Mountains to Sound March, and that's Ralph again in front, the Pathfinder leading the way on that march, which went from July 4th through 8th, 1990. Next slide. So what happened on that march? It was led by Jack Horning, as I said, and the hikers walked from Snoqualmie Pass to Seattle's waterfront in 5 days. That's a long way. There were lots of blisters, lots of horror stories. And at that time, going down what's now the John Wayne Trail at that time, and now the Palouse to Cascades Cross-State Trail, had only old railroad ballast rock, not the finer gravel that exists today. So people were walking on that in boots, and the blisters were horrible. However, they did get VIP involvement. Our congressional representative, Rod Chandler, our state senator at that time, Gary Locke, who was chair of the Appropriations Committee, the mayors of various cities, and so on. The publicity of that march helped to build the enthusiasm and support for this bigger vision of a greenway, much as Harvey's writings and stories in the early days had built the vision and momentum for the Issaquah Alps. Who went on that original march that is here today? Stand up, please. Thank you. It's that march that built the momentum for a greenway. So now, next slide.
I forgot to mention, Ken, I added 3 slides of the people.
These are good. I didn't have these pictures. That is Jack Horning, who, by the way, on the very first day of the march, tore his hand open on a spike or something and had to go to the ER, get stitches, and came back that night and led the march the rest of the way. Tough guy. Ralph and Stan Unger. And one more slide. And that's Bill Longwell and Brian Boyle, lands commissioner at the time, and Bob Rose. Okay, next slide. So, what was the vision of this march? That we knew this region would prosper and grow. That's about the time Microsoft was starting up or booming, beginning to boom, if you remember. There was a tidal wave coming, and we knew it. So you had to act now if you were going to make this happen. And the goal was a broad, connected, forested corridor paralleling I-90, which flies in the face of the economics of an interstate fueling growth, but that's what we were going to do. This is a little club that could. You had to accommodate growth. We knew that. It was coming. But do it in better and different ways, and we've seen all the horrible examples everywhere else. You had to find the balance between humans living here and wildlife and nature and sustaining itself. You cannot foul your own nest. Humans don't seem to understand that. You have to retain clean water, clean air, and ideally, it's nice to have some wildlife around. We got that here. We wanted to keep the I-90 corridor from turning into this endless urban strip, which every interstate we've seen has become. And to do that, you had to build a broad coalition. You can't do that as just Issaquah Alps Trails Club. You needed the Forest Service. You needed state DNR. You needed the county executive. You needed the city of Issaquah. You needed the Sierra Club and Weyerhaeuser sitting down at the same table. Instead of fighting, cooperating. This was unheard of. So you needed a broad coalition. And the goal then was preserve the qualities and character, in fact, the history of this region that defines us and makes it so desirable and livable. And that is easy access to nature through public lands and trails, a forested landscape full of wildlife and salmon, which is kind of unique to this area too, clean water and air, and smart environmental protections and growth management that doesn't just let sprawl go everywhere. Next slide. So how did you make this happen? Well, some key factors. We were very lucky that after this march, after this club started it, said, who's going to lead this now exciting effort? And very fortunately, Jim Ellis, civic godfather of the city of Seattle, stepped up and said, I will become president. Took some arm twisting by the Trust for Public Land. But Jim Ellis did this, and if you don't know Jim, he was Jim Ellis of the Preston Gates, Bill Gates' dad, and Ellis law firm. He was the Ellis, so one of the larger law firms in Seattle. He led the effort to clean up Lake Washington in the 50s. He brought the convention center to downtown Seattle, which has sustained it as a vibrant downtown instead of decaying and empty storefronts. Jim has been a key leader of this region for decades. An interesting fact, he agreed to then lead the Greenway, and all of his past accomplishments as well were all in tribute to his brother. And I mention this in the context of D-Day memory, 75 years as of June 6th. His brother was killed in the Battle of the Bulge during World War II. Jim was in the Army as well, but stationed in Idaho at that time, and was so angry and upset. He stormed out of the house, his wife saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And he went out, and he was going to go to Germany and volunteer. He wanted to kill people that had killed his brother. And he walked back through the snowstorm, and his wife confronted him and said, "What are you doing? You're just going to throw your life away too. That's not what your brother would want. Why don't you do something in honor of your brother? Make your life count to things that your brother cared about, like nature." So Jim decided at that point, and he did it the rest of his life. He's still alive at 97. 1/3 of his time to family, 1/3 to his job, 1/3 to community involvement. And he has lived that up until he could. This is why he took on the role of president of the Greenway at age 70, mind you, and made it a full-time job. He then, being where he was in the community, could get the broad political, governmental, and civic support that was needed. He had the credibility and reputation that people knew, if Jim Ellis is behind this, there's something really happening here. And they would join the board. They would contribute. And that was key. He had several beliefs. One was which you never claim success. You always share and give credit to others. And he did that well, and it helped build even more support. When you make people feel they're part of something that's bigger than themselves, and they get credit as part of that, it works. Magic. It started at Snoqualmie Pass, but then it made perfect sense that why would the Greenway end at Snoqualmie Pass? The forested landscape continues all the way to eastern Washington, Ellensburg, in fact. And with Jim, we were able to then extend the Greenway concept to Kittitas County against their wishes initially. They were very skeptical of us West Sider 206ers, as they called us, and our urban ways extending into their county, and we're going to take their land. But now Kittitas County is equally on board, equally supportive, and equally believing in the Greenway. And the last thing I'll mention happens to be me. I worked for Boeing at the time. Boeing, again, because of Jim Ellis and his reputation, agreed to loan somebody, happened to be me, out to help the Greenway effort as part of their community giving. It was meant to be a 2-year assignment, and it stretched 10 years before I finally had to go back. So 10 years of my career at Boeing was spent working for the Mountains to Sound Greenway. And I say that's key to the success, not just because it was me, but because that added a staff person when we only had one other, an executive director, and she was focused on the budget and the board and all those things. This allowed me to focus on land acquisitions, trail connections, and all these other things that really helped propel the Greenway forward. And again, not just me, it could have been anybody, but the gift from Boeing was immense and very important to the Greenway at that time. Next slide. So what is the Greenway now? I mentioned this coalition. It's 60 plus board members from a variety of organizations, all sitting down, all breaking bread together. Another one of Jim's tricks. People don't generally fight if they're eating together. You try to have a polite conversation. And so that's one of his tricks. Have everybody eat dinner, talk about the issues, figure out middle ground. The Greenway is not the strident organization saying, cut no more trees. The Greenway is the middle ground saying, okay, if we have to cut trees, where are we going to do it where it makes sense? How are we going to restore that land and make sure it comes back in a better condition, etc. As you can see, some of the members include everybody from DOT, the tribes, Sierra Club, the timber companies, the cities, the counties, etc. You get those groups together, that's how you make something like this happen. Next slide. And what has happened? Well, again, it started here in the Issaquah Alps. That is the actual heart of this connected greenway. And if you look at this map again, whoops, how do I do that? You can go all the way from 405 off the slide on the left, all along I-90 on the south side, and at this point, you're way out past Rattlesnake Lake, and you've never set foot in a developed area. You have to cross State Route 900, you have to cross Issaquah Hobart Road, and you have to cross SR 18 or go under the Raging River Bridge. Other than that, you see nothing but forest. That's pretty amazing. And the lighter green are lands that were public in 1990 when the Greenway organization started. So for example, Tiger Mountain, most of that was at that time state DNR land in 1990, minus the big square section in the middle, number 45 up there. But everything in dark green is what had been acquired since the Greenway was formed. So you can see it was connecting, expanding, bridging the gaps, and making sure everything was linked together. When you look at something like the Raging River State Forest, that is huge. That could easily have become another Snoqualmie Ridge, which is just to the north across the interstate, sprawling southward into the Raging River Basin. Instead, it's a permanent state DNR working forest that also supports recreation and wildlife. Next slide. Giving a little broader view than the Issaquah Alps, if you look at the entire greenway, each one of those little squares represents a square mile of land. So again, everything in light green was public in the 1990 timeframe. All the dark green has been added since the greenway was formed in 1990, which is over 900,000 acres of land added to this landscape in public ownership since 1990. So that's huge when you think about it. And in terms of wildlife connectivity, you're connecting the North Cascades to the South Cascades, all kinds of incredible benefits to people and the natural world. Next slide. Importantly, the Greenway also, at the last congressional session, was finally declared a National Heritage Area, which is a national parks designation. It enables potential to get increased funding. It is better for tourism purposes to attract people to a natural heritage area. The Greenway is now taking on the role of developing a plan for how to implement what this National Heritage Area means. But it's important that this got national congressional recognition. Mind you, this all started by the Little Issaquah Alps Trails Club. Next chart. I just put this up there, a lot of words, but I want you to just read for a second what the Greenway mission and vision are, which builds upon everything the Issaquah Alps Trails Club started. And while you're doing that, I'm also very proud to introduce our new Greenway president for the next 2 years, who was on the original Greenway March in the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, Doug McClellan. History rewinds and loops and reconnects itself, and Doug will be a superb leader. Okay, next chart. So again, the coalition, just from the Greenway webpage, just a little blurb about what it does. So there's a board of directors, I'm also on that, a board of advisors, and a technical advisory committee, and now a much larger staff than when I was there. Okay, next chart. I'm going to wrap it up, but every 5 to 10 years, we recreate that original Greenway March. This was from the 10th anniversary trek. By the way, in the middle at the top, that's Doug's wife and his son. Christy was carrying her son inside her on the original Greenway March. He participated in every one since. That's when he would have been 10 years old. Next chart. The 20th started in Thorpe and went all the way to Seattle's waterfront. Next, 25th. And guess what's coming? Next year is the 30th. Now, we're all getting a little older, so it's not a straight through bike ride and hike this time. It will be a sequence of events that include a float trip, a day of hiking or two, a bike day, a restoration or service event day, a series of events throughout the Greenway, which you could participate in during the full event of 9 days, as I recall, 9 days, or select events. So mark this down. I believe, do you know the dates, Doug?
July 10th through the 19th.
10th through the 19th, next summer, guaranteed one of the best events, one of the best experiences you could ever have in your life. Next chart. This is just a pictorial view of what I showed you in words. So again, you'll start in Ellensburg. You'll do a shuttle up to Cle Elum, float the Yakima River, go up into the Teanaway Community Forest, come back, go up in the Middle Fork Snoqualmie Valley, and experience areas and trails of the Greenway and an organized, hosted event with good food, good company, good entertainment. It's really going to be a fun event, as the prior treks have all been.
Friday night in Issaquah, and we got to do it right.
There will be a Friday night in Issaquah. The mayor will make sure we have a fun time. And for those that want, we'll end up at H&H Tavern afterwards, or the Rollin' Log, just in keeping with Issaquah Alps history.
This one is on 520 coming into the University of Washington. So instead of coming into Seattle, which is still kind of torn up on the waterfront, it'll be going in on 520, which will be great.
Yep. Next chart. Okay, so lastly, I'm going to wrap up. What's our gift to the region? Well, Issaquah Alps not only sustained and preserved what we have around us, which, by the way, would clearly be covered in homes were it not for what this club had done. It created this bigger, broader, regional and nationally recognized greenway. This is unique to this area. There is nothing like this anywhere else in the country, and I dare say the world, where you have wild lands this close to an urban environment that you can walk out your door and get to on public trails. For 40 years, this little club has achieved far more than anyone ever dreamed possible. Everybody had been a volunteer up until just the last year. We hired an executive director part-time because we don't have the money. But otherwise, this has all been purely done by volunteers. And the Mountains to Sound Greenway, I believe, is the Issaquah Alps' largest gift to this region, to all of us, to our planet, and we should be very proud of what this club has done. Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Doug Simpson.
That's a tough act to follow. Before we go any further, I'd just like to give credit to Tom Anderson, who took on the role of planning this over a year ago and has worked incessantly ever since, and he's done a tremendous job. Probably very few people are aware that the Issaquah Alps Trails Club actually published 7 different books, though 2 of them are really just pamphlets. 2 of the books had major overhauls from their initial publications. The most popular and successful book was Bill Longwell's Guide to the Trails of Tiger Mountain, which over some 35 years underwent 10 revisions. It was actually the first IATC book and the last to have a revision. Not surprisingly, Harvey Manning initiated 2 of the 7, the 1981 published Guide to the Trails of Cougar Mountain and Squak Mountain, and in the same year, The Flowering of the Issaquah Alps. Though not a book published without any cover or binding, the first publication ever from the club was Manning's 18-page introduction to the Issaquah Alps Trails Club, dated January 15, 1980. Ralph Owen provided me with a copy of this historic bulletin. Harvey stated the purposes and goals of the club, initial hike classifications, and brief descriptions of nearly 50 hikes in 6 different diverse locations, as well as other explanatory details about the club. Guide to the Trails of Tiger Mountain then was the first true, this is a more modern edition, the first true book that the club published, first in May of 1980. It's had 10 revisions, the last of which was August of 2006. Photos in it were by Larry Hansen.
This is the original one. There now, and then later editions had this stickier look.
Bill started with an inspirational quote. Bill Longwell. I only went out for a walk and finally concluded to stay out till sundown. For going out, I found, was really going in. That quote he took from John Muir, and it certainly parallels Bill's hiking experiences. The book includes descriptions of 44 trails and roads covering at least 100 miles. Each gives descriptions with the trails of cumulative distance and points of interest by tenths of miles. In the introduction, Bill wrote, "The Issaquah Alps are remnants that some of us call the old mountains. They have the look of the first wall of the Cascades, but in fact stood high and mighty long before those newcomers rose up. They were part of an uplift that once extended from Yakima out to the Pacific Ocean." Bill wrote this about the summits. The summits of the Alps rise progressively higher eastward. Cougar on the shores of Lake Washington attains 1,995 feet, Squak 2,000 feet, West Tiger 2,948 feet, and East or Main Tiger 304 feet, virtually the same as Snoqualmie Pass, 26 miles away on the Cascade Crest. Tiger Mountain was a pretty isolated place until 1966, when hiking use exploded after the Mountaineers' publication of 100 hikes in western Washington. And Bill wrote about the founding of IATC. When the Issaquah Alps Trails Club was founded in 1979, one of the 2 top items on the agenda was rationalizing the tiger scene. Publication of the first edition of this guidebook in 1980 was a major step in seeking to have tiger declared an urban tree farm, a new breed of forest. The 1980 election of Brian Boyle as state land commissioner brought a new leader to the State Department of Natural Resources. He soon announced the creation of Tiger Mountain State Forest, defined as a working forest in an urban environment. Bill went out of his way in great depth to thank many who helped with the book or the trail work, including Harvey Manning, Susan Olson, Larry and Marty Hansen, and the weed whackers who spent so much time working trails with Bill on Tiger. Bill had spent years at his first love, Squak Mountain, which he knew probably better than anyone since or ever. When Manning and the club saw the need to build a trail on Tiger from north to south, they asked Bill to undertake the monumental task of building the Tiger Mountain Trail, which he did with the help of many, including many of his Hazen High School students. The TMT remains the 16-mile centerpiece of Tiger Mountain, his crowning achievement with the club. Next we have Bedrock and Boot Soles by Marvin A. Pistrang, published in January of 1981. It includes a 2-page geological map. Pistrang, showing a sense of humor, wrote on the title page, "Dedicated to enhancing and supplementing, if not stomping out, the series of Manning infamous geology lectures." Not wishing to get technical, I'll just repeat one statement from page 2 of the booklet. Unlike most of the Puget lowland, now buried under thousands of feet of glacial sediment, the Issaquah Alps remain the largest and most accessible area of pre-glacial bedrock available to Greater Seattle's burgeoning population. I hope you got all that. Mr. Pistrang, like so many prominent club leaders, passed away some years ago. I never met him. Are we on the same one? No. The Guide to the Trails of Cougar Mountain and Squak Mountain, published by Harvey Manning, first in 1981. It had 3 revisions, the third by Harvey Manning and friends, including Ralph Owen, the fourth by Harvey Manning and Ralph Owen, not just a friend. This book precedes the establishment of the Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park, when not only was IATC aggressively advocating for parkland, but developers were trying to create villages in the park. And Harvey has something to say about that, as you might imagine. The VIP Flax claimed to be proposing sane, moderate planned development, a compromise between the extremism of the IATC and the extremism of unplanned development. Untrue. To start with, the use of the term village is fraudulent, an attempt to give the standard suburban sprawl a good name, akin to the use of parkway and boulevard to make freeways sound like funways. The villages proposed for Cougar conjure up visions of homely crofters driving sheep along the lane, picturesque old men sitting on benches telling rosy-cheeked children the legend of Rip Van Winkle, buxom wenches turning spitted oxen in the fireplaces of the public house. God rest ye, merry gentlemen. If you believe all that, there are Cougar Mountain operators who would like to talk to you about investing in shore property on Spirit Lake. Harvey was a formidable foe of developers. The book divides into 4 areas on Cougar: the wilderness with 8 trails, coal country 4 trails, the Western Creek 6, and the precipice 8. Also included were 4 trails on Squak Mountain, for which he was assisted by Bill Longwell. It also has 6 maps. One other passage showing the Manning style, his description of Shy Bear Trail, a name he gave to it himself, of course. And you saw that on the map earlier. Until 1978, the only traffic on this trail was animals, notably the bear, which did the heavy construction and left the most abundant signatures. When I arrived, it moved out, doubtless to remoter portions of Cabbage Creek. One day while exploring there, snapping, cracking dead branches as I walked, I paused, and in the sudden quiet heard a violent snapping, cracking, receding rapidly into the forest. A very shy bear it is. Though well flagged and easy walking the whole distance, part of this route is not real trail because the bear was defatigable. Trust the red ribbons. Over time, after the developers were turned away and the Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park was established in 1990, the book needed major revisions, and Charles McCrone came along. Charles was devoted to Cougar Mountain and expanded the Manning-Owen editions into what may be the finest of the club's books. The authoritative guide to the hiking trails of Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park and surroundings. This is edition by Charles McCrone in August of 2000, second printing 2 years later. The foreword was written by Harvey Manning, and the book included original text by Manning and Ralph Owen. This is a much more comprehensive book than earlier editions by Manning and Owen, and it omits coverage of Squak Mountain that was in the earlier books. In the foreword, Manning wrote an 8-page essay on how we got the park. He recalls his own experiences fighting for a Cougar Park and the origins of IATC. including the Day of 3 Thunderstorms hike, which we were told about earlier. The Issaquah Alpiner began publication carrying our every week schedule of year-round hikes and walks and our action program to save the trail country. Simultaneously, we intensified a drumbeat of public information and agitation, articles and interviews in newspapers and on TV, talks to environmental groups and pieces for their newsletters and magazines, and leading their members on tailored hikes. Guidebooking had begun at the end of 1977 with publication by Mountaineers Books of the first volume of Footsore, a 50-page section introduced, quote, "A geological oddity, a finger of mountains reaching 20 miles out from the Cascade front and poking Puget Sound City right in the eye." On February 10th, 1979, when I typed a scurrilous little one-page flyer summarizing the potential of the mountain, and Harvey, of course, was very scurrilous, and mailed 100 copies to environmental organizations and community leaders and newspaper editors and public officials, I called not for a park, but a great big green and quiet place. The response was what could have been expected, silence, except I was astounded by a handwritten note from the mayor of Seattle, Charles Royer, pledging the support of his person in office, declaring, "We need Cougar Mountain." Manning cited support from Seattle Mayor Charles Royer and County Councilman Randy Revelle and Larry Phillips, two long active supporters of creating the Cougar Park and of IATC in general. The trail sections included Coal Creek Town Site, 7 trails, the Curious Valley, including the Far Country and Delia Wall, 6 trails, Sky Country, 12 trails, the Wilderness, 8 trails, the East Slopes, including Bear Ridge and Shangri-La, 6 trails. Macron also added super loops, and I have a little excerpt from that. The loops in this chapter aim to give the heart, mind, and feet tangible experience of this unity through combining park and non-park trails and even roads in a creative fashion. By offering these loops, I hope to reinforce the concept that open space does not have to mean a walled-off park, separate from modern society, to which we drive to recreate. It is something which on Cougar still threads through the neighborhoods and joins park to park, Cole, May, Cougar, Squak, and a host of smaller ones, city to city, Bellevue, Newcastle, Renton, Issaquah, and is part of a much huger network of the Mountains to Sound Greenway. In addition, he added an appendix for these areas: the Military Road, 2 pages, the Seattle Walla Walla Railroad, 4 pages, and the May Creek Gorge, 2 pages. Macron wrote an afterword, which I think is perhaps the most literary written piece the club has produced. And I'll read a couple of short excerpts from that. To compromise places like Cougar Mountain, we risk our own souls. My argument is that to be human, in the way that the human race has been human for millennia, in the way that we were meant to be human, requires places like Cougar Mountain. My answer then is not statistical, recreational, or environmental. Strangely, it is not even particularly altruistic. It is spiritual and thereby psychological as well. And in a curious way, it is rather self-serving. It has to do with the kind of experiences we can only have in places where wild nature is a predominant environment, and things made, organized, and shaped by human society are far distant. These places still exist in Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park, sometimes surprisingly close by to trailheads and neighborhoods. To have this Church of the Soul available not just on a weekend getaway, but as part of our daily lives, to be walked at sunup before work or at twilight after, is a priceless treasure. It is a gift for which we must thank the visionaries and citizens and elected officials who in the 1980s chose this destiny for the land against many odds. It is a gift whose value seems to magnify as surrounding development fills in and the park trees soar ever higher. Such a place is unique. For lost and destroyed, we have, for all our skills and powers, no tools to recreate it. Then we have The Flowering of the Issaquah Alps, the Harvey Manning edition, with the help from his friends, published in May of 1981. From February to October of 1980, Manning walked 75 days to compile a list of plants in the Issaquah Alps. He discussed the complexity of compiling the inventory of plants, as some plants start and end in a few days, whereas others keep going for months. He arranged his discoveries by months, listing 246 plant species found on Cougar, Squak, and Tiger Mountains, with some attention to Rattlesnake Ledge. Acknowledging that his discoveries were not a complete inventory, he seemed to be expecting that there were many more species to be found. He specifically looked to Rattlesnake Ridge, Taylor Mountain, Grand Ridge, and Mitchell Hill as future locations to explore. The book includes an appendix on Rattlesnake Ledge, a single page, and another specifically on ferns, 4 pages worth, by Ed Alverson. He claimed that at the time there were only 2 published materials devoted to the flora of the Issaquah Alps. The second edition was published in 1995, a lapse of 14 years. It was published by Fred and Ann Weinman and Manning. The passage of time provided opportunity for introduction of additional native and non-native plants, many unusual. The epicenter of the Weinman's exploration was Rattlesnake Ridge, with more than 20 new species with its proximity to alpine and seed sources in a higher and more remote area. In a 1994 article, Weinman said that at least 75 species begged for inclusion in another edition. This edition increased the number of identified plants from Manning's 246 to nearly 500. It included not only Rattlesnake Ridge, but also Taylor Mountain and Mitchell Hill, as well as areas along streams and creeks. Weinman abandoned Manning's list by season to categories of trees, shrubs, and flowers by colors, and plant families of grasses, sedges, rushes, ferns, and weeds. He provided charts of plants and seasons with indexes for both scientific names, 5 pages worth, and common names, 7 pages. He also provided a 5-source bibliography. Perhaps the most different book the club has published is The Coals of Newcastle, 100 Years of Hidden History, the longest book the club produced at 121 pages. It was written by Richard K. McDonald and Lucille McDonald. Lucille McDonald was a prominent pioneer history author who wrote several books on King County, as well as the popular book The Egoni, which some of you may recognize. Richard, her son, was affiliated with IATC. The first printing of this was June of 1987. It was reprinted in April 1996 and July 2001. This was a Washington State Centennial Project published by the Issaquah Alps Trails Club in cooperation with the Newcastle Historical Society. It was edited by Ralph Owen with an introduction by Harvey Manning. Photo editors were Ralph and Peggy Owen. Consultants were Milt Swanson, president of the Newcastle Historical Society, Fred Rounds, the so-called guru of Cougar Mountain, Oliver and Mary Jo Rouse, and Bill and Ann Peltola. It was aided by a grant from the Bullitt Foundation. Cougar Mountain was once called Newcastle Hills and was a significant source of coal, regarded as Seattle's and King County's earliest large industry. Prospectors and miners worked area hills for 100 years from 1863 to 1963, digging nearly 11 million tons of coal. It was a big market for San Francisco and other points in California. The coal was first discovered on Squak Mountain in Issaquah in 1862, then in 1863 at Coal Creek, today's Red Town area, which along with neighboring Newcastle were essentially company towns with up to 600 houses as well as hotels and company businesses. After World War II, a Dr. Russell invested in property for development. Not liking the name Newcastle with its mining connotations, he suggested calling it Cougar Mountain around 1950. Significant to the area growth was not only the earlier construction of the Seattle and Walla Walla Railroad, but in 1975, the Lakemont Boulevard for greater access. IATC first presented the concept of a Cougar Mtn Park in 1980 to the Newcastle Citizens Committee, and IATC later staged the first Return to Newcastle event, as you've been told, in 1983. The book provides a detailed history and wonderful pictures and serves a great reminder of the past. And I have one short excerpt on that. Harper's Magazine issue in May of 1884 has left us an unattractive portrayal of the town. The great body of men employed at the Newcastle mines, 250 to 300 in number, is made up of Welsh, Scotch, English, and Irish, just the same crowd of heedless colliers physically and morally that you will see everywhere else under similar circumstances. Only a small number have laid any money by, and all ceaselessly complain of their poverty. The town itself straggles in and out of the great dumps of clay and waste that extend like black spurs from the foot of the mountain, the cottages being grouped upon the rocky, stump-infested, forest-bound hillside without an attempt at order or comeliness. So that you're talking about the Red Town area here, I think. This little book is called The East Side Family Hikes. It was written by Peggy Marchie and published in 1990, revised by Fred Zeitler in 91, 93, and 2001. The booklet has lists of local hikes appropriate for babies in backpacks, toddlers, and anyone else who wants to go on an easy hike. Barchi said that it was kid-tested by herself. The booklet lists 26 total hikes, some of which are not regular IATC hikes. It is divided up into areas: the Lake Tradition Plateau, 4 hikes, Preston Area 3, Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park 5, Lake Sammamish Area 5, Bellevue Area 4, and even trails in Kent and Maple Valley. Then the last of the books is Squak Mountain, an Island in the Sky, written by myself, with trail descriptions by David Langrock, published in July of 2004. Squak Mountain is a pinched mountain with steep sides, and other than early coal mining and logging, it was not frequented by many hikers, despite its proximity to the town of Issaquah. Harvey Manning said that it was kept on the back burner, a noble beast suffering from benign neglect, as the other issues were more pressing for the Issaquah Alps Trails Club. And as it says in the book, the venerable founder-president, whose editorial whipsaws once were facetiously dubbed the gospel according to St. Harvey, added, after a number of years of benign neglect of Squak Mountain, threatening private development and promising public acquisition, have caused us to lay the lash on our backs, to turn up the heat on Squak, our lovely lesser-known Central Alp, but we need help to accomplish our assigned job. The name, like that of the town, is Native American in origin. The Indians called it Issaquah, which meant sound of water birds, or valley of the singing birds. Its awkwardness reduced it to Squak and Issaquah after being known as Gilman for many years. 2 club members might have undertaken a book on Squak. For Bill Longwell, a May Valley resident, it was a release from his Hazen High School teaching duties and an outlet for his energy and love of nature. Squak was his first love, and he knew it as no one else ever has. Bill wrote, Squak Mountain is one of my favorite places because I have spent and invested so much of my life there. I have hiked there over 550 times and walked over 4,000 miles there. He was a great record keeper of every little detail in his outings. I have been there every month of the year, every season. I've been there at sunrise, sunset, midnight, in the sunshine, in the fog, in the rain, and in the snow, even in late April, when healthy and when I was sick. With groups of people over 60 once, but I like it best when I'm alone, when I'm there alone. Squak Mountain is a wild place. In a sense, it is a wilderness of large things. Groves of large trees still exist on Squak, and of small things, notably, mostly the small. It is a one-person wilderness, a wilderness of the heart. A wilderness experience is not only of scenery or of vastness, but one of mood, and I have a particular mood on Squak. It is a mini wilderness. It is not the bigness that makes Squak a wilderness, but the small things, and they have taught me many lessons. Squak Mountain is my teacher. But Bill was asked to move his energies to Tiger Mountain and lead the development of the Tiger Mountain Trail, and the rest is history. Then Jack Horning, fresh from Pennsylvania, burst on the scene in the late 80s and early 90s and totally immersed himself. He was Squak's savior, overseer, and visionary, as he was for the Mountains of Sound Greenway, as you've heard. It was his idea that a book on Squak should be more than a hiking guide, which is how I constructed it when I undertook the project of a book for Squak. Stimson Bullitt purchased 5,909 acres of Issaquah's mountaintop in the 1940s and built a cabin getaway there. Some concrete flooring and the fireplace are the only remnants. Little used, it was eventually donated by the family as a state park. Manning called it the greatest act of benevolence in local history. The book is divided into 3 sections: history and observation, the hiking trails, and various supplements. It, like the club's other books, was a labor of love. And finally, I will speak very briefly about the Alpiner, the club's quarterly newsletter. It was initiated by Harvey Manning in January of 1979, as you've heard. He did most of the writing for years with frequent contributions from Bill Longwell and others. When Harvey stepped down from active participation, though he continued to contribute articles, a number of volunteers did the editorial work for several years until 2003, when I volunteered and took over. One big change took place a few years later when we shifted from volunteer layout to work with Minuteman Press in Issaquah, creating a professional quality publication. I edited the Alpiner from 2003 until the end of 2018, when I retired. Financial constraints and my departure resulted in the discontinuation of the Alpiner publication, though it was recently restarted as an online publication only. Old-timers like me, though, prefer a hard copy, and some like it to receive a printed hiking schedule with each issue. It was a labor of love for me and something I took pride in. Since I had a journalism background, it was not difficult to produce, though it was time-consuming. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, and this has been great. I hope you all have enjoyed this as much as I. Let's give all of our venerable speakers another round of applause. I think they all just great. Yeah. Well, we have time for a few questions, maybe. So I came up with the first question: why don't we still have a teddy bear hike? I don't know. Let's see, Dave, you want to talk to that? Just
think I ever participated.
Oh, well, by way of background, Harvey Manning initiated this teddy bear hike usually on January 1, and he would take a teddy bear along. Should I explain why he had a teddy bear? Please. Well, okay, then you could. There was a joke, a question about, well, what should the 11th essential be? This was mountaineers' inquiry, and people came up with all kinds of interesting answers to that question, and Harvey's answer was a teddy bear. So he started the teddy bear hikes. As to why we don't do it anymore, well, I guess it's because we don't have Harvey anymore. But do you have a better answer, David? Maybe we should resurrect that in the future. That's something to put on our list of things to do. Well, I really loved Ken's characterization of the club that we all know and love, the little club that could. Just the amount of accomplishments that have taken place over the last 40 years in terms of, trail building is cool, but the advocacy and the legacies of things like the Mountain Sound Greenway and the Cougar Mtn Park and the Squak Park and Tiger Mountain. I mean, all of these things are just quite stupendous and just amazing that they actually happened. So are there any other questions you want to present to our venerable speakers? Susan? Chabinsky, okay, all right.
They were, by the name, you might guess by the name, a Polish couple that migrated to the United States after World War II, and they did a lot of hiking and exploring and discovered that trail, reported it to Bill Longwell, and he named it after them. There was actually kind of remains of an old road. Am I kind of close, Steve?
Yeah, it was a logging grade traversing the north side,
And
west side.
yeah, and they kind of opened that up because it was some real wild country in there, and they opened that up into more of a trail.
That wonderful tree that we use as a trail. They walk across this fallen tree. Pretty scary.
Okay, well, let me just remind you, you charter members, after we finish our little goodbyes and all, let's meet outside on the deck here, and we'll have a photo opportunity. And let's also take the opportunity to get some photos of board members for the club here. So with that, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next event. Great, thank you.